Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, August 12th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you. On this episode, we have another pitching prospect on his way to the big leagues. We'll take a look at Zebby Matthews. We'll introduce you to the latest call-up that we'll be chasing onto rosters probably next weekend because many people could not add Zebby Matthews to the roster this weekend. We have a closer demotion in San Francisco that took place as the weekend was getting underway. Camilo Doval at AAA right now. We'll dig into why, take a look at his long-term outlook. Eno pulled up a report of some underperformers, hitters who have underperformed projections this year. We'll look at why things are going wrong for those players. Now that we're in nearly the midpoint of August, it's going to happen just in a couple days. I think we can maybe start to adjust our expectations for those players a little bit. We've probably seen enough to lower expectations in that group. We've also got where the money went and some adjustments we made to our own rosters this weekend. If you're not already a member of our Discord, join the link in the show description. How's it going for you on this Monday?
It's good. I'm taking my son to Snell versus Sale. And we're sitting behind home plate, and the tickets weren't that expensive.
Hey, it's the best thing about going to the yard on a Monday, I think, right? Is you get a little bit of a discount.
That must be what that is. And also for my son, it is T-minus 2 days till school starts. So
that's right. School starts early.
This is like one of those like, okay, this is the last day of summer. Let's go to a baseball game.
We still have many high school age students working as lifeguards at our many water parks in this state, so we can't let them go back to school until after Labor Day when travel season slows down. At least that's how I think it works in Wisconsin. But
I think that some of why my kids go to school earlier, and then there's the private school, some of them go to school even earlier, is so they can bake in more vacation during the year.
Yeah.
And so they have these things called like ski week or mid spring break or whatever. So they have like a little bit, but what is annoying about that is that you're not, because all these schedules are in different places. It's really hard to like coordinate with your cousins or like, your friends from a different city where you're just like, nope, you're not on vacation that week. I get it.
Yeah.
But no, I think this was a pretty long summer break. I mean, they still get that feeling of, being free and, and just doing whatever they want for a little bit. We tried not to one of the things that can happen in Palo Alto is like, well, he's on this camp for this, and then he's on this camp for this. And then after that, he goes to a second camp that next day, and then he's doing this thing, and he's got to do the piano, and he's got to do this. And, the kids here are very overscheduled, and we push back a little bit against that. So both of our kids had weeks this summer where they had nothing planned and they could just, kid out.
I'm on board. Consider that our latest plea to one day have a parenting podcast where we give parenting advice. Mostly tell you about things that didn't work. But I think in that case, I think that's a pretty good call because it seems like a lot of kids have way too much going on. Good to keep them busy, but don't make it like adulthood where you have very little downtime. That's not what being a kid is all about.
I did make him read, do my older kid that was home a little bit more. I made him read, Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, which is a Philip K. Dick novel that inspired Blade Runner, but also Philip K. Dick inspired like a ton of like Minority Report, ton of movies that are out with his writing. And so he said that it was challenging, but in a good way. And then he also is about halfway through the Fangrass glossary. So he's reading up on all the good stuff.
I am anxiously awaiting your son's view of max exit velocity because I am souring on it. I wrote about that in our recap that went up on Monday. I'm starting to think it just doesn't tell us anything. Like I'm closer to throwing it out completely than I've ever been before. But we'll save that conversation for a future day because we have.
I have to tell you, the kids are talking about it. Like, and when I talk about kids, the 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds are talking about it. We were listening to some kids in the next batting cage over yesterday while we were doing our practice, and they were asking each other what their max exit velocity was.
See, I think you got to shift the conversation to like the upper half, the EV50s, right?
Oh yeah. I should tell
more that way.
That's
relatable.
That's a conversation I should have with the 9-year-old.
Yeah, you should. You got to fix it now. Otherwise, they're going to be obsessed with that top end number and not the larger swath of numbers that follow that are probably much more important and predictive. Nevertheless,
I would rather have like at least the 85th percentile or whatever. I mean, that's what teams use. I mean, I use max. I thought you were throwing out the whole concept.
No. I mean, I think the thing that I'm worried about is that I'm putting too much on a player's ability to hit a baseball very, very hard when there's so much other information out there we use that matters more. Like maybe it just doesn't inform us of a attainable power ceiling as much as we want it to. That's sort of
the Brian Hayes problem.
The gap that I've fallen into with max exit velocity. But let's start with Zebby Matthews. Who is Zebby Matthews? Well, he was not born Zebby Matthews. He was born Daniel Zebulon Matthews, an 8th round pick of the Twins in 2022 out of Western Carolina University, right-handed pitcher. Has ridiculous numbers across 3 levels this year. Zebby Matthews started this year in Cedar Rapids at High A. He's been more recently pitching in Triple A with St. Paul. The numbers, they look fake. 114 strikeouts against 7 walks in 97 innings this season across those 3 levels. He's given up 7 homers, which isn't bad. Equal number of homers and walks allowed in the season for Zebby Matthews. So, given the injuries that are piling up on the Twins, Matthews might actually throw some pretty meaningful innings for a team with playoff aspirations during these final 6-7 weeks of the season. So the question really is, like, how good is his stuff? I mean, as a guy that's going to be pitching at his 4th level this year when he debuts, what kind of realistic expectations should we have for Zebby Matthews?
I mean, under the hood, it's all good news. I've got here the stuff plus and location plus for his pitches. It's maybe not super standout, like 105 stuff plus on the 4-seam. That could go down in the major leagues. It could go up because you might throw harder, but 95.6 is pretty good velo. And as you see from the interaction graph that's below, what was plotted here is velocity versus ride. And he's got above average ride and above average velo. And that's how you get, that's the easiest way to get to an above average stuff plus for your 4-seam. So it looks like, I would say, an above average 4-seam at the very least. And then the curve has a 108 stuff plus, and the slider has a 121 stuff plus. And so that's an 86 mile an hour slider, which it passes the magic number for sliders. The magic number is 85 miles an hour. So that's at least a 3-pitch mix. The other ones, the sample isn't so great on. But one thing that does stand out is the location plus is above average on every single pitch except for the cutter. So, the cutter is a question mark in terms of stuff plus and location. I'd be very interested to see what happens with that cutter in the major leagues. But he, at the very least, has a 2 breaking ball and fastball foundation that I think is pretty saucy. That, of course, he does have something going on if he has those K-BB numbers in the minors. So shout out to Zebulon, Georgia, where I used to hang out a little growing up. I doubt there's anybody listening from Zebulon because I think it's population 4,000 or something. But if there is, what is up? This is a crazy moment if you were listening from Zebulon, Georgia. But so anyway, Mr. Zebulon Matthews, I think has a good future.
Yeah,
I'm interested in him.
Debut coming Tuesday against the Royals, and the way it looks like it's mapped out right now is that the Twins have Louis Varland available to possibly go to a 6-man rotation if they want to. If they use Matthews, Varland, and Festa, it means Pablo Lopez, Bailey Ober, and Simeon Woods-Richardson are still regulars as well. Then that's the way they can stretch it out the rest of the way. Any one of Matthews, Varland, or Festa could just drop out. They could go to a 5-man rotation. So it's kind of an ongoing audition, I think, the way it's set up. I know Varland came up for a doubleheader and then went back down. So it's really hard to know what the actual pecking order is right now. It may hinge a lot on how Matthews fares against the Royals. Seth Lugo going on the side of that one. Nice spot to debut in the middle of a playoff race.
And as much as I've liked Louis Varland in the past, he does have an above average stuff number. But one thing that I have noticed is that he's trying to become a 3-pitch pitcher with the knuckle curve. Before he was kind of a little bit too close to a 2-pitch pitcher, I think at times, or somehow he's a little bit predictable. And then the locations on his breaking balls haven't been good. So when he gets into counts where he needs a strike, he tends to lean on the fastball, and that's an iffy strategy in today's game. So, that's what you're watching from. If you're watching Louis Varland, is the ability to land the breaking ball for strikes. Zebby seems to come with that ability baked in, and that might be what makes him have the job and Louis Varland out. The Semyon Woods Richardson has the worst fastball of the group. I like David Festa the best overall of the group, just because I know a little bit about him. I've seen him make some adjustments at the major league level, and Zebby has yet to make those adjustments. But not only are they auditioning for staying in the role now, but they're potentially auditioning for the third start in a playoff situation, because Joe Ryan's injury may be season ending, even if they go to the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a Terry's major strain for Ryan. The description is a grade 2. That's usually like in the 4 to 6 week range at a lower end. So, you add 4 to 6 weeks to now, add in recovery rehab, like it's
close.
October. So maybe we'd see him in the playoffs. It seems unlikely we'd see Joe Ryan again before the end of the regular season. Tough break for the Twins, too. We were just talking about the quality of the top end of that rotation. Ryan's success this year, step forward, is a big part of why they've been able to do that. Let's talk about Camilo Doval for a moment. This one was a little bit of a surprise to me when I saw that he was going down to AAA, but the results haven't been there this year. It's an ERA close to 5, a whip of 161. It's still over a strikeout per inning, so there's still some bat missing ability there, 22 saves. So, yeah, the ratios have been bad. That's worked against your teams this year. Doval was another one of the closers, much like David Bednar, who we talked about going into the weekend, who I thought was in that circle of trust. I had no real concerns about a performance dip like this costing him the job even temporarily. But what's next for Camilo Doval? What kinds of adjustments do you think he's going to have to make at AAA and eventually once he returns to the big leagues to reclaim his role as the Giants closer?
It's sort of a fascinating thing because, I mean, just as a fan, you already know something from this, which is that this is kind of amazing, like kind of surprising, right? So you can look at other teams and be like, oh, well, David Bednar is obviously struggling and he's something's going on mechanically, but they're not, I don't think, about to send David Bednar down. They would be just more likely to maybe say, okay, Chapman's going to get the next saves chance and we're going to work on Bednar and he can get his role back. That's the sort of normal way that you take a guy who's been a dominant closer and then you figure it back out. You don't send them down. So that already tells you something. And I think it's fair to say that it tells you something about the interaction between the pitcher and the coaches, right? Like I hate to say like wake up call, you know what I mean? Because you can find out that his extension is down. You can see that his fastballs don't have the same stuff plus this year. And you can see that there must be some mechanical component to this. I can also tell you that swing percentage is down against Doval. So the league has said, this guy doesn't have very good command. We're going to wait till he throws a strike. And Doval's been in the zone less this year. So there's a couple things going on. There's a mechanical thing, and then there's an approach thing. He should be watching Emmanuel Clase and should be watching someone just throw that type of stuff that he has just in the zone and attack the zone and know that you're probably not going to give up homers because of the type of pitches you throw, right? And the velo you throw them at. So that's what he should be doing, but he should also be thinking about his extension. Now, here's a quote in a Justice de los Santos piece in the Santa Cruz Sentinel, and it says this. He has taken to Doval the idea that his extension is down and there's something going on there. And this is what Doval tells a reporter. The coaching staff tells me I'm not stretching as long, that I'm taking that step very short. Doval said through a team interpreter. But the problem with me is that I feel very comfortable with it. So they just left me alone.
Okay.
I mean, I hesitate to like label people, but and of course this is through an interpreter, so there's still a chance that something's being lost in translation. But to me, if I was his coach, I'd be very disappointed to get that sort of that sort of result from feedback I was giving him. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so that's it. So we're not changing any mechanics. So I think that's why you say, well, this is a wake-up call, and he's got two things to work on, which are mechanics and approach. If he I think if there's an attitude shift being like, wow, they sent me down, there's two ways that can go. I have children. There's two ways that a wake-up call can go. One is, screw you. I hate this organization. They're screwing me. I'm not going to do anything. I've had that where the kid's in trouble and they're like, nah, and they just yell at you, right? Or what you hope to do is say, no, we're giving you the space to try and make these corrections because we need to make these corrections. And this should be a wake-up call of sorts. He could be back up in 10 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to imagine. I mean, he's got electric stuff. Like, it's just like execute the game plan, make the adjustment. I think he can make the adjustment. The Class A comparison is really interesting, though, because the big difference for me is that Doval misses bats the way you'd expect him to, typically, at a level
Class A.
in line with
he throws more sliders than Class A, right?
Yeah, I always find it odd. I feel like when I watch Doval, his fastball command has been the shakier thing. Like the slider seems like the pitch he's a lot more comfortable with. But then he can
beat on the slider just because they anticipate it, and it's not 98, and they don't have to sit 98. They might sit slider.
Yeah.
And I just from conversations around the league, and I have a piece coming about this soon, like sitting slider is a thing. People are doing it more and more because there's fastballs are being used less and less. Sitting slider has become a viable strategy. Yeah, so
this is like worse than ever. I mean, he's throwing it as much as he has in the last 3 years, 49.6% slider usage from Doval this year.
And I think it's too much because he throws a 98-mile-an-hour cut fastball.
Yeah. Yeah, I picked him up in a Solds league way back in late April or May, and I thought somebody made a huge mistake. I'm going to rack up tons of great innings and really nice ratios. And I looked at the year-to-date. I mean, I basically got the same ratios Doval's posted all year. It just hasn't turned around so far.
And I think the way to read this is that you pick him up in your keeper league if someone dropped him, and maybe next year he'll be fine. But if you're in sort of like 10 and 12, and even I dropped him in a 15-team league because it's like the season is short. Even if he does figure it out in 2 weeks, you wouldn't be using him for 2 weeks, and then you'd have 4 weeks left. And what if you pick up Ryan Walker, you get 2 weeks of saves before those 4 weeks. And then you get a chance to get Doval again like anybody else if he comes back up. So, and then if Doval comes back up, is he guaranteed that he comes back into the closer role if Ryan Walker's been doing great?
Right. Walker throws hard enough to keep the job. He's been effective enough to just be the guy for the rest of the year. So even if Doval is back in 10 days, it might be in a setup role. It might be more of a, hey, you're back and you're helping us, and we're still a team that's in the mix for a playoff spot and we need you, but you get your job back later if you continue to go down the progression that we want. I could see something like that unfolding. So completely understand like the path for dropping Doval. It actually makes sense even if you're thinking about a possible short-term demotion.
The thing that worries me about Ryan Walker is he's very cross-body. He's a Jake Arrieta clone for me. And what worries me about that is that kind of arm slot plus mechanics is often can have big platoon splits. And one thing that you can see for him is that, lefties, he dominates righties. 167, 244 OBP, 228 slugging against righties for Ryan Walker. Against lefties, it's 222, 291, 350. That's still pretty good. But that's the only place that I get a little bit nervous with him because it is mostly, sinker slider it's the mix and the mechanics can lead to lefty problems.
We'll get to a few other closers people were chasing in the Where the Money Went segment at the end of today's show. The clip that went viral for all the wrong reasons was Red Sox outfielder Jarren Duran this weekend yelling a homophobic slur at a fan at Fenway Park after being heckled, which is going to probably lead to some disciplinary action, including a suspension. I was looking back for some past precedents. I know there was an incident with Kevin Pillar back in 2017. He yelled a homophobic slur at Jason Mott and got a 2-game suspension. And the way I think about this, is if the culture is going to change in Major League Baseball, in locker rooms, in clubhouses, in sport, in society in general, there has to be more than a short 1-2 game suspension for something like this. This has to cost players something. The Pillar suspension was without pay a couple of years ago, so financially it did cost him something. I think it's got to be a little more harsh than this, just to send the right message, to just explain, to show everyone this is not acceptable behavior in any facet, sport or otherwise. And Duran issued the apology through the team, and I don't know, like that's like one step towards trying to right a wrong, but I'm anxiously awaiting this version of discipline to see if things are changing in terms of the league's intolerance.
How many games was the Pillar one?
It was only 2. And I don't know what the right number is. That just feels light. And I think, Billy Beane, not the A's architect from Moneyball, but former big leaguer who came out after his career was over, recently passed away. He was responsible for diversity and inclusion for baseball for more than a decade, right? Like going around telling his story, thinking about his passing and thinking about this incident happening reasonably close after. It's like, well, how much have things changed in big league clubhouses in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, right? Probably not a lot. And I think one small step, one way to start imparting that change is to make it clear that this is simply unacceptable.
Yeah. 2 games does seem light. And I just, I don't know. It is one of those things where baseball works on precedent, and I don't know. There isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of people saying the N-word to each other, and getting suspended for it, so there aren't other sort of corollaries. You can be like, oh, this is what we do for hate speech, but yeah, this is baseball is a private employer and it can make the changes it wants to have the environment that it wants. This is not protected speech. He's at work. You can't, no matter what you think of free speech protections, you can't be yelling this sort of stuff at work. Nobody could be saying this while being a cashier at a McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like you can't do this stuff. And so it's unfortunate that he feels that that's, something that he can use, as easily as that.
Yeah. No tolerance. That's where it has to go. So we'll see what kind of response Major League Baseball and the Red Sox have here in the next couple of days. Let's move on to another topic. You pulled this together, the biggest underperformers of 2024. And I think we looked at a board like this probably mid to late June, because at that point we're like, okay, these are the guys we're probably targeting via trade because projections still like them. Anyone can have a relatively down half season and come back and be themselves, or maybe even better than projections in the second half. Maybe it swings back the other way in some of those cases. Maybe you get lucky. But even if you're just buying into the projection, a lot of times you can be right. This is a group that's kind of loaded with high quality players, many of whom we liked at the beginning of the season, many of whom we still liked when we did this exercise 6 to 8 weeks ago. Julio Rodriguez just jumps off the page as the biggest underperformer among hitters by WRC plus. He was projected for a 134 coming into the year, and he's clocked in with a 97 so far. Still time to right it now that he's finally healthy again, but minus 36. And you've got a bunch of other guys that are more than 25 points off their projection, including Matt Olson, Corbin Carroll, who was an easy early first rounder. Olson was a late first rounder. Gleyber Torres, we both loved. We thought it was going to be summer of Gleyber. Dansby Swanson, who even with a few small warts just looked like a great oatmeal-y player where he was going, and the always frustrating Ke'Bryan Hayes, who's been the biggest underperformer of the group in the sense that his poor performance has been actively working against you. It's a 68 WRC plus. The longer you've continued to push Ke'Bryan Hayes out there in your lineup in most leagues, the more you've been missing out on something better in just about all formats.
Yeah, and it's almost hard at this point in the season to pick a guy you want off this list. You know what I mean? But I would say that Rodriguez and Olson, who were the top in terms of what they were projected to do on this list, have shown some signs of life. Rodriguez had one of his sort of blindingly hot months that he does have. And it came in July, which is close to the time he had in the last two seasons, where he hit 375, 434 with a 688 slugging in July, and was sort of single-handedly being the Seattle offense. I think that the injury was really poorly timed because it's during that time that he's super streaky and should be putting up the big numbers that save his season, you know? And for what it's worth, the strikeout rate has been climbing a little bit as the season's going. So there's a lot of sort of indicators going in different directions, but you know, for him and then Matt Olson, who we showed on the podcast, you know, with Trevor on a live stream that, you know, some of the stuff that was going on with him in terms of them filling up the zone with fastballs low against Matt Olson. I think that we've seen a little bit of a return to production for Olson that is a little bit mostly seen in the ISO. At least so far in August, he's hit 275, 357, 611 for Matt Olson. And I've seen him turn on some fastballs, especially low in the zone. So if I'm picking two guys off this list, it's easily Julio Rodriguez and Matt Olson. But if I take those two guys off the list, you know, and say, okay, pick someone else, it's getting a lot harder. I think there's with Paul Goldschmidt, I think there's real concerns about aging curves. I think that's the same for George Springer. You know, you've seen Springer, you know, kind of have a little bit of a bounce recently in terms of his splits, but you know, it's like he returns for a little bit and then it's gone again. You know, like he had a good July with a 274 average, 343 OBP, 505 slugging, and in August he's back to 167 OBP, 229 slugging. You know, it's like, was that it? Are we just going to get one good month out of George Springer a year now? And that's, I think, a fair question when you're talking about someone who is 34 years old. So, you know, for me, I'm going to take Springer and Goldschmidt off of this list and say, I don't want them going forward. I don't want them in keeper leagues. This is like a pickup off of the wire situation, you know, going forward for me. Like if someone has dropped them, maybe I'll pick them up if it's free. But so I think the most interesting names are people who are kind of mid-career, like Gleyber Torres, you know, Dansby Swanson and Taylor Ward, who seem to have good approaches, who just have not been as good as we expected this year.
Yeah, Ward was doing exactly what he was projected to do for the first 2 months of the season. Had a WRC plus in the 120s. I thought he was a buy anyway sort of guy because I didn't think people were valuing Taylor Ward at that kind of level. And it's just been a brutal stretch over the last 10 weeks or so where it's like 5 homers. Then doesn't really run much, just nothing really clicking for him. Some of that's the team context not being great too, but you know, even on a bad or below average team, there should be more coming from Taylor Ward. I think the Gleyber one still baffles me. You know, it's for the season a 238, 310, 354 line, 10 homers, 4 steals. The K rate's not bad at 21.8%.
Like a lot of the skills seem to be there. It's just the in-game power is mostly what's lost, and he's not pulling anymore.
And it's like, is he just not finding the contact point, or has something actually been lost? He seems awfully young to have actually lost bat speed in a way that would be irreversible.
He had 27. Like, he is somebody I would be targeting in keeper leagues as a buy low for next year. You know,
I'm curious too with free agency coming up. The defense hasn't graded out well at all, right? I mean, he's below average for arm strength, already plays second base. I think he's -5 for outs above average this year. I wonder
where's
if
he going to
Gleyber
go?
is he going to take a 1-year deal and take another crack at free agency after 2025 because of the way this season has come together, barring some kind of late season run plus playoff heroics that would maybe push him back into the more coveted group of free agents. I kind of think that's path
probably
he's on.
what's going to happen. One thing that is interesting about that is if you think about a 1-year pillow deal, then he doesn't really want to sign in Miami.
No, he's got to go to at least an average park for power, but maybe even above average park again, just to keep that door open.
But you know who will offer him money is somebody like San Francisco.
Well, maybe
but he'll be trying to go somewhere like, really good situation for him would be LA.
Yeah. Another place where he doesn't have to be the guy, kind of gets the press reset.
And then a bad situation that's good for hitters is Anaheim. So I think Anaheim looks like it's a pretty obvious place where he might end up. And that's okay. So I think, you kind of run through the different places he might go. And it's like, there's really only one likely place that wouldn't be great for him, which I think would be San Francisco. And then, a lot of other places where it would be better for him. And you have to believe there's some fresh start here. This is baggage. This is like New York baggage where they have to ask your manager about you, and like you have to get benched and you have to say things like, I'm going to get better. It's like, I still think that there's enough there. And he's 27. Taylor Ward is interesting to me because he's older than everybody thinks. Probably if you're listening right now, guess a number in your head. And the real number is 30 years old for Taylor Ward. And he's kind of streaky. If you just look at his rolling production charts, you'll see that he has these peaks and valleys. And I've talked to him about his approach, and to some extent, he's like a guy who just is very selective and wants to hit pitches high in the zone for fly balls for power. And it works. And in terms of his full season numbers, he probably should have a better slugging percentage and more homers than he does right now. But you can also see that during this really bad stretch, he's hitting like 55% fly balls. So he's almost like, one of these like 50% fly ball rate guys that like gets too vertical and just starts popping everything up. I don't know that I have a lot of confidence in the hitting coaching in Anaheim. But generally I still like his skills, even though he's 30 and you could put him in the aging, I don't want them anymore bucket. I think 30 is a little too early to do that. His projections are still good. His skills seem like they're still pretty good. His chase rate's really low. His barrel rate's pretty good. I think generally this is a guy that I would still buy on.
I think my hesitation with Gleyber that's crept in, just looking at him for a minute, is just that we're looking at a guy that has done most of his damage throughout his career against fastballs. And now we're in a league that's using either more fastballs or just getting rid of bad ones. So the pitches that Gleyber has feasted on for most of his career are slowly disappearing. And now if you don't have a good approach that allows you to do damage on breaking or off-speed stuff when you see it, there's not much left to hold on to. So
he has one season with a pitch type value above 0 for sliders.
Yeah. So I kind of think I'm looking at Gleyber more as sure, someone's going to sign him and he's going to play a lot because he's young and he's still sort of interesting. But I see him more as like a mono league draft and hold third,
second baseman or something.
Yeah.
Next year.
I'm looking at him as a little bit less of a guy that I really, really like. These flaws were there. I just looked through them because if you look back at 2019, which we know was a year with a particularly fun ball. He was crushing the ball, even on non-fastballs that year, relatively speaking. He hit 10 homers off breaking balls that year, right? So maybe I was looking at that and using that as proof of concept.
Wasn't he even in that 38 homer year? Didn't he hit like 10 of them against Baltimore?
He hit without
Baltimore too.
Yeah, it was the rebuilding Orioles with really bad pitching in the old park.
Yeah.
So I think some of the appeal has fallen. I don't think he's like undraftable. I just think he's probably, for Gleyber to be on my rosters next year, he has to fall into the top 200 overall. then I'll take the shot based on playing time and the combinations of skills he's shown. But I think he has to show us more against non-fastballs in particular if he's going to be the player that many of us, all of us almost thought he was going to be coming into 2024. Taylor Ward, I mean, what if he got out of Anaheim? Like that's the one thing I'd wonder about. And then the other name that's on here that I think we've talked about at least once this year is Adolis Garcia. I think that kind of falls more into the players who I didn't expect to age well bin anyway. Yeah. But even in that group, I'm not sure that we're seeing massive skills erosion in the areas where I thought it would be there. So I could actually see myself being, for 2025 only, more optimistic about a Garcia bounce back than about a Gleyber Torres bounce back, even though the general underlying skills of Torres historically have been the skills that I'm more likely to target.
I guess I see your point. I mean, one I was going to point to already a big drop in contact outside the zone, which is we know something that ages really terribly. And that's part of why his swing and strike rate is up this year. And yet his strikeout rate is not up. And he's also been successful with the swing and strike rate he has this year, you know? So yes, I don't think 2023 is coming back, but you know, could we still see like, you know, a 2022 with fewer steals, you know, next year? Could he hit, you know, 240 with 25 homers and 15 steals next year? Yeah. Yeah, that's still pretty close to what his projections are, you know? But it is so not my type of player. And with the steals leaving this package, it becomes a lot more of the low batting average slugger type, which doesn't often fit my builds and doesn't help as much as you'd expect late in the draft. Unless you've built this thing where you've like, I've got batting average and steals at the wazoo, like I'm going to take a bunch of Adolis Garcia types at the end. I guess it can fit a build. It's just doesn't likely to fit my builds.
I think I'm willing to chase it more with someone who's done it for several years, like Garcia, when the K rate hasn't gone through the roof, than I am to try and chase the Nelson Velasquez, Matt Wallner. Like we go after this profile 50 or 100 picks later than Garcia is going to go. Yeah. But it's a bunch of guys that are kind of just trying to break through for the first time or did it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks at the end of a season. I think if the price is that low or even, again, 40 to 50 picks away from those guys, if we're talking about Garcia in the pick 200 to 250 bin, the lower average big masher that plays every day, I think he's still going to play every day next year for this Rangers team, at least as the roster's currently built. And we know if their spending this offseason looks anything like their last one, that would be a great thing for Garcia to have that runway for another 600 plate appearances. Then I think he can exceed a lot of the other lower average mashers that we're chasing who sometimes fall into platoons, end up coming up light in playing time if they either don't click right away or they have to share their spot.
Yeah, it's true. Playing time safe is underrated. I mean, no matter what Matt Wallner does, he's still on a team with Trevor Larnach, and you know, the guys that they've proven in the past will go up and down and platoon and do this. You know.
Yep, that's just the way it goes. Probably look at a pitching underperformer chart in a similar way, and maybe next Monday we'll kind of put that out there as something to throw out there and look at. Let's take a look at where the money went this weekend. Right off the top, saw a lot of Joe Musgrove pickups. I was a part of one with our co-manager friend of ours, and I
supposedly 94, 96 in his rehab.
Right. So if that's where the velo's at again, do we go ahead and say, all right, let's just throw him out there and maybe not watch it, maybe watch the highlights of the first one, just in case it ends up being disappointing, because it has felt like for the times we've seen Joe Musgrove this year, and it hasn't been a lot, it's only been 10 starts scattered throughout the year, he has not been himself. So if he's finally back close to 100% healthy, I'm definitely interested, but I think it's a very big question mark.
Getting the fastball back up to 94 miles an hour would actually be really big, because I've heard from a hitting coach that they're sitting slider against Musgrove. And of course you sit slider against Musgrove because, you know, he's really pushing. That's his best aspect. And he's really pushing the numbers on sliders. Like you can count the cutter, which is, it could be a fastball, but it's 3 miles an hour slower than his fastball. So if you count the cutter as a breaking ball, he is throwing breaking balls 60% of the time, even more, maybe 65. So that way you don't have to sit 92. You sit, 88, and you hit the cutter the other way, and you slug on the sliders that are now down to 81. The slider and the curve are both at 81, 82. So I think things become easier. But if he's 94 on that fastball, then he's going to go to it a little bit more, and open up everything, for the rest of his arsenal. So I'm really interested in seeing what his velo is. I would rather throw him from my bench for the first start in the big leagues, I think.
But good enough to stash in a lot of leagues, just given the possibility if that velo is back up a tick and a half, 2 ticks compared to what we've seen this year, because that unlocks everything for him.
And the break balls are still good,
Yeah. Yeah, that version of Musgrove might not have quite the same ratios ceiling that we've grown accustomed to, but if he plays like an SP3 or an SP4, finding a guy like that inexpensively on the wire for the last month and a half, you're pretty happy with that.
Should get you wins too.
We talked about Tyler Mahle a bit on Friday. Not surprisingly, he was heavily added over the weekend, along with Eduardo Rodriguez. So I'm curious who your would you rather is between Mahle and Rodriguez for the rest of 2024.
I'm going to take Mahle. His stuff isn't all the way back to where it was, but his velo is closer. He is 92.7 this year, 92.8 before, 94.1 at his peak, Tyler Mahle. So just a little bit off last year. Eduardo Rodriguez is 91.4, was 92.3 last year, and 94 at his peak. So he's got further to go when it comes to velo, and he didn't strike anybody out. He struck one guy out in his first start. So it just makes me nervous. A guy coming back like that, showing that kind of velo loss in the division he's in. I'm sure his schedule is not that great. And then so with a 70 stuff plus for Rodriguez, I know that he's outperformed his stuff plus in the past, but that's really, really low.
Yeah, the NL West kind of nasty right now. We'll talk a lot about that with Britt on our Tuesday episode. But I actually think there's more interest, even in shallow leagues right now, in Ryan Nelson than there is in Eduardo Rodriguez. Ryan Nelson has looked like a different guy. The last 60 days, 3.39 ERA, 103 WHIP, 62-12 strikeout to walk ratio, and 66 in the third innings. Only 4 homers allowed. More recently, a couple of 9 strikeout performances, some 7s mixed in there too. Like, he seems like he's got everything working, and I'm curious if there's been a pitch mix change or a stuff change that's actually unlocked this level from Nelson. Because when he debuted a couple of years ago, he was someone who popped a little bit and looked like he was going to be maybe a solid mid-rotation starter with at least an average, if not above average, strikeout rate. And maybe that's starting to happen just a little bit later than we expected.
It's so weird. I've always wanted him to mix up his pitches more. And throw the cutter and the slider and the curve and use all of his pitches effectively. And I think quite obviously the thing that has changed for him, Ryan Nelson, is that he is going to the fastball like never before. Oh my Lord. He has a game with 75% fastballs recently. And I'm not even counting the cutter as a fastball. If you count the cutter as a fastball, he is, now at sitting 75% fastballs.
I mean, that's like early career Freddie Peralta. That's fastball Freddie stuff. Like, how is he doing? Is it with ride, like excellent command? Like, why is that working?
Yeah, it's always been, a pitch that Stuff Plus loves a lot. And it is ride really. But it isn't. I mean, 95 velo is pretty good. I mean, it's just a weird ass strategy in today's league. Maybe that's it. Maybe he's just like, people are like, oh my God, this guy just keeps throwing fastballs. Maybe they're all just like still guessing slider. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it'll work forever. And even, in those splits, if you're talking about, the strikeout minus walk rate underneath the hood for him, we're talking about a 33% strikeout rate in August. It's so far from what he used to be. He started May was 15%. I don't know if I believe it. But July, this could be the Ryan Nelson that we can believe in. July, he had a 23% strikeout rate and a 5% walk rate. He's always had excellent walk rates, Ryan Nelson has. So that kind of a pitcher, I think, could give you like a high 3s, low 4s ERA and some wins. I don't know what's going to happen, though. I mean, there is a big discussion right now in Arizona about what's going to happen. Are they going to stick with a 6-man rotation? That's what I think is on Fangraphs right now. If you look at, they have that schedule thing. I don't know what RotoWire is saying.
Yeah, I mean, with Gallen, I think has a minor injury, general body cramps, was why he left last game. So dehydration, illness, something along those lines, more likely than not. But if you look at their rotation, now that Merrill Kelly's healthy, Gallen, Kelly, Brandon Pfaadt, I mean, you're paying enough money to Eduardo Rodriguez and Jordan Montgomery where you're probably not squeezing them into long relief roles just yet. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe you stick with 6 until you get a little closer to the playoffs and then shorten up based on form and decide, kind of make it if you're in the playoffs, make it an open audition for the last spot in the playoff rotation and just let all those guys sort of take workload off of each other and be more fresh for October.
Yeah, I mean,
make it back.
They are hot. They have 1, 2, 3 losses in their last, I'm eyeballing it, but it looks like 18 or something.
Yeah, they're playing really well right now.
And Gallen, the reason you don't do a 6-man rotation is if you have an ace. You don't want to cost your ace or your 2 best starters any starts. You want to start them as often as possible. That's how we landed on sort of a 5-man rotation. But as much as Zach Gallen is their ace nominally, I don't know that he's so far better than the rest of that rotation that you really care about losing a start from Zach Gallen that you're giving to Ryan Nelson, basically.
Yeah, I think the other part of it too,
especially the way Ryan Nelson's pitching, I guess.
Yeah, Nelson's form matters here. And I think with Gallen, I mean, look at the workload that they put on his arm last year. It was like 210.
He talked about it in the spring, being like he stepped up off of his schedule in the offseason in terms of how much throwing he did. And he was behind in the spring because of it. And that's why we talked to him about it. So yeah, he felt that extra pitching he did in the playoffs.
He was up over 240 innings if you count the playoff innings last year, and he's missed a little bit of time this season. So I do think part of making sure he's better than he has been so far at the end of the year is
him so hard,
not pushing him right. I think that helps you short term and long term. So I do think Nelson's probably pretty safe based on those factors right now.
It also does make it hard from a fantasy standpoint to time anybody on a 2-week start.
It does.
It makes it a little bit hard to believe their schedule. I do believe there might be a 2-week start for Montgomery this week. Not this week, but you may see someone that sometime soon will have a 2-start week, and you may I want that guy for that 2-start week, and then they decide the day before that they're stopping the 6-man.
And they've got off days on changes. Thursday each of the next 2 weeks, so they can just use 6 and no one gets 2, and that's a nice way to go. So they got a nice stretch of schedule too. They got the Rockies to start this week, at Tampa Bay for the weekend series for 3, at Miami to start next week, and then a little bit tougher going up to Boston.
Yeah, I forget who I highlighted. I highlighted one of these pitchers as having a really great schedule. I think it might have been Montgomery. Yeah, Montgomery gets Colorado at home, Miami on the road, and the Mets, which, that's a pretty good lineup. But and I think he misses, if it's still a 6-man rotation, he misses the Dodgers series and gets at San Francisco instead. So Montgomery, as bad as he's looked, I dropped him for, head-to-head reasons, and I picked him up today again.
Yeah, Montgomery has been on and off rosters all season long in pretty much all of my leagues. Shout out to Spencer Arrighetti for reestablishing his career high in strikeouts again over the weekend.
And we are past the part where Stuff Plus really matters that much anymore. Now for Spencer Arrighetti, we're in K-BB territory. That's the stat you should be looking at. And it hasn't been amazing, but it's been getting better, and it is above average for sure.
2 or fewer walks, I believe, in now 5 of his last 6 starts, but the K is going through the roof. And you just take a look. I mean, last 8 starts at 64-15 strikeout to walk ratio in 47 innings, mid-3s ERA, 109 whip. The Astros are doing it again. That's to answer the question. Yeah, they are.
There's a little bit of a schedule issue with him, though, I think. Let me see what Arrighetti's got. He's got a versus White Sox, which I like, but then he goes at Baltimore, and I think they have a 6-man too on paper. But they could also, when Verlander comes back, and Verlander is slated for August 21. So is somebody going to lose their role? Is it Blanco? Is it Arrighetti? Is it a 6-man? That throws everything up in the mix. But right now, with Verlander coming back on the 21st, Fangraphs says Arrighetti stays in, gets the White Sox, and then at Baltimore, and then at Philly. I do not necessarily want him for those. But if the schedule changes or there's a setback for Verlander, a lot of it changes. But instead, the Verlander start is versus Boston. So Arrighetti's and the Houston Astros schedule is not actually super nice. That's very different from the Diamondback schedule. That should factor into some of our discussions or thoughts about the way this is going to go down the rest of the season.
I did add Arrighetti in a 12-teamer. 37-11 was the bid, so maybe a slight overpay, but I think it's more of a let's see how it works itself out at the very least. I get that start against the White Sox, and I overpaid for a streamer, but I think there's a chance that they either go to 6, trying to get Verlander completely right, or someone else goes down in the time between Verlander's return and now. That could always happen as well.
Yeah, or if they lose a pitcher, it could be Blanco instead of Arrighetti.
Yeah, that's possible too. I mean, Blanco's workload is in just a new stratosphere right now, so they may want to monitor those innings for a bit before you get to the playoffs. The relievers I hinted at earlier. So Ryan Walker, Justin Martinez from the D-backs, and Lucas Erceg for the Royals. I believe there's a Hunter Harvey injury that may have tipped that closer battle into Erceg's favor.
They still use MacArthur sometimes, though. So, and they had Harvey with the save. I mean, they're doing the modern bullpen management, and it's a little frustrating from the outside.
Yeah, based on usage, do you think there's even much of a difference between Erceg and Martinez right now? I mean, I think AJ Puck's still going to be a factor, like we talked about last week. I don't know if there's a clear cut. This is the guy taking over for Paul Sewald.
My order was Walker, Erceg. Walker, Martinez, Erceg.
Okay, so you're prioritizing role
recent
over
saves
stuff kind of right now.
I mean, but they all have pretty good stuff. They all have pretty good stuff too. So, and I think that that's something that Derek Hardy's always found is that that the most important thing almost is role. But I'll add that I do think that fastball stuff plus is pretty big. But if you look at these guys, all 3 of them have good fastballs. So not an easy way to separate those guys. I didn't get a lot of them because the bids were very high. But I've got Kopech. It was like 4th on that list, basically. I do think Kopech might be marching towards that closer role. He really is taking to Dodgerland, and he does have the closer's fastball. I did. I don't have that much money in most of my leagues, but there was a common name that I got, I think, in all 3 of my leagues. I got Ty France in all 3 of my leagues. And in fact, I got Bowden Francis in all. Nope, I got Paul Blackburn instead of Bowden Francis in one of them. But Bowden Francis has a 2-step this week. He has a new split finger that he adds to a slow but good by Stuff Plus curveball. I think he's a legit 3-pitch mix guy now, and he's got a 2-step this week that I don't know who it is off the top of my head, but I think it's a decent one. Let me look it up real quick. But that was my reasoning for him. I also thought, there's a chance I get him for this 2-step. I paid for him at like sort of streamer level prices, but beyond that, he gets at Anaheim today, and the second part of his 2-step is at the Cubs, which I'll take. You know, you don't always get to pick your second part of your two-step. Then after that, he gets Anaheim again, and then he gets an at Boston that I don't like, and a versus Philly I don't like. So, you know, maybe I start him for 2 weeks, leave him on the bench for a week or two, and then there's some, you know, he could get the Mets down the stretch, and St. Louis. So there's other starts you might like him, and the season ends with Miami. So if Bowden Francis gets a start in the last 3 games in Miami, that could be a really useful thing. It might even be worth keeping around depending on what the rest of your roster looks like. So Bowden Francis, the reason for Ty France is that, you know, you just took him out of the worst situation for a right-handed hitter almost in baseball in Seattle, and then you put him in one of the best situations for a right-handed hitter in baseball in Cincinnati. So Ty France, you know, is playing every day too. Through some snafus, I ended up washing Eloy Jimenez into Ty France, and I don't really want to get into some mistakes I made, maybe. But
playing time might be in your favor. It's going to be.
There's similar players in terms of projections. Mount Baltimore is not actually great for Eloy's power, you know, and you know, so this week Ty France is home for 6 games. That's a real easy start. And people said they wanted to hear who we dropped. These are 15 teamers. So I dropped in the TGFBI. I dropped Leody Taveras for Eloy Jimenez for $13. Leody Taveras keeps showing up on Razzball as like a top 50 type bat, and I don't believe it anymore. This is like one of those ones I've given up. He doesn't do any of the things I like. I don't need stolen bases. He's not going to hit for power. He's not hitting for batting average. I'm done. Justin Henry Malloy was a dropper for France, and there's still things to like about him long term, but I think in this situation in a redraft, and it's okay to drop a guy like that. You know, his home park does not help him. I dropped Orlando Arcia for Ty France and Barf, and Orlando Arcia was just a pickup for the Rockies. It was a bat streamer. I dropped Max Meyer for Bowden Francis. I think I might have just been wrong about Max Meyer. It's just not the fastball isn't very good, and the slider isn't enough to make it work, I think.
I have a trade to reject, actually, that I received an offer over the weekend. It was an auto-new offer. It was Max Meyer for like $3 right now for my Lucas Erceg, who's $1. And as it stands right now, Erceg looks like an easy keeper. So I think that's a simple rejection, because I think I'd rather have the future saves than the starter lottery ticket that Max Meyer appears to be. A guy that I've definitely been wrong about too, because he looked so good coming out of spring training, those first couple of starts before they demoted him.
It is a really good slider, but there's just nothing else other than the slider, I think, right now.
Yeah, still some work to be done. Maybe an offseason can fix it. Other drops for me, that league where I added Arrighetti, Heston Kjerstad went back on the IL with concussion symptoms. Easy drop for me just because playing time's a little choppy. And if you're back on the IL with that concussion, it might take longer to come back. Just hopefully he's able to get back and be completely healthy at some point, given the severe nature of concussions. David Festa was the drop for Joe Musgrove in one league, just because, you know, we're not sure if Festa keeps the job, even though the stuff's really good. I think there's a little more present floor and ceiling for Musgrove. Jesus Sanchez picked up in a 12-teamer for JJ Bleday. Both teams have light schedule weeks, but it's just kind of pushing a little more power out there. Sanchez continues to show us just a little bit more of a ceiling.
Sanchez is making me look good, I think, a little bit. I've been talking about how the bat speed is good, the swing is short, the exit velocities are really good, and I'm checking my work here. July 268, 302, 537 for Jesus Sanchez. And so far in August, 231, 318, 462. So looking a lot more viable recently, Jesus Sanchez is.
Made a drop of Ben Rice, where I was using him as a second catcher for Joey Bart. That was just a $1 Bart pickup in a 12-team league, so I felt pretty good about that bargain bin. 15-teamers, Tyler Malley. I have a lot of money in TGFBI because everyone's been paying more than I've expected all season, and I'm actually in contention to maybe win my league. I'm not going to win the overall, but I dropped Jonathan Cannon for Tyler Mahle, team context being a big part of it, and baseline skills, I think,
needing wins
a little higher. Yeah,
looking at the schedule, or
much more comfortable just throwing Mahle out there, even in matchups I don't like, than throwing Cannon out there anytime, even though Cannon, could figure it out and be useful eventually. I got one of your guys, Edward Cabrera, $38. No backup bid from anyone.
Oh,
Andre
TGFI
Palante
kills me that way, dude. I bet so often no backup bids on my bids. Today, I won Eloy 13 to no backup bid, Ty France 11 to no backup bid, and Paul Blackburn 11 to 7. I got a backup bid.
No, the 38-0 feels pretty bad when even 11. I'm like 11.
Could have got him for one.
One would have been great. I'll settle for the 11-0. And then Gerard Encarnacion, a $2 unopposed bid. Jordan Westberg was the drop for me. I think he was dropped by a lot of people last week. I don't see a timetable for him with that hand, but I just assume a few weeks at a minimum. And
Gerard, is continuing to really rocket the ball. And in fact, Gerard is doing what I thought Luciano could do. And quite literally taking Luciano's time. Like, Luciano's not playing. And Gerard Encarnacion is not starting just against lefties. He is basically their DH. This is how I see it. I think there's one game he took off since he's been up. So, if you want a guy who rockets it all over the place and has a little bit of a swing and strike issue that has kind of seemingly figured something out in that regard, then, I think he's as far as lightning in a bottle goes, Gerard Encarnacion is actually more fun than a lot of other names, because you could put him in like a Reese Hines bucket. Oh yeah, he hits the ball hard, but he never hits the ball. Except there's just like he had a 24% strikeout rate in AAA, and he, has he figured something out there?
Just a little more proof of concept, I think, that you can get excited about with Encarnacion at the moment. That's exactly why I picked him up. Just hoping for lightning in a bottle. He's got a 4-game stretch to begin the week. TGFBI plays on the NFBC, so max schedule. I figured, given that they got a couple of lefties going in that series, he's probably not sitting more than one. One of those matchups is against Grant Holmes. Great story that we talked about, but not a guy you feared. And Charlie Morton, as we've seen, has struggled at times too. So I just thought that was a really good streaming opportunity at a minimum. If Encarnacion hits, he'll keep playing. If he slumps badly, I'm cutting him next week. Like there's a pretty clear fork in the road probably.
And there's still enough feels like pulling teeth trying to get runs out of this offense that I think they're going to prioritize having somebody who hits the ball super hard in the lineup.
Yeah. And in this case too, I just needed to get a backup outfielder because I had a couple injuries. I also thought for a lineup that has, Colton Cowser, Miguel Vargas, and Alex Verdugo filling outfield spots, I needed something with ceiling because I needed a reason to sit some of those guys occasionally. I can't keep playing all of them and hope to move up a couple of spots in the standings. I don't think there's enough juice in those bats in particular. But those are the adjustments we made this weekend. We hope you had a good weekend on the wire. If you'd like to get a subscription to The Athletic, you can get one for $2 a month for the first year. TheAthletic.com/rates and barrels will get you in the door. You can find Eno on Twitter at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the pod at Rates and Barrels. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.